Hi, my name is Bob and welcome to the homestead, y'all. Well, we're going to talk about winter composting in this video. I've got to get another compost pile started. Now, I like to build my compost piles right in the garden, right where I'm going to use them. We're going to build this pile right here today, and then as I turn it, I'll flip it over to this other side, turn it, and anything that's left on the ground is going to be left right here in the garden, right where we're going to use it. But I do want to talk about winter composting a little bit. For years, I always composted all summer long and didn't do any winter compost. Probably about 15 years ago, I started composting all winter long. I noticed that several of my piles of leaves that I would make in the fall composted down pretty good during the winter time. So I started doing some experimenting, mixing my greens and my browns, and I come up with a pretty good system. I use manure for my greens because in the winter time we don't have a lot of greens to use. And then we use old hay, just dried hay. Now if you have green hay, that works as a green. But if it's completely dry or straw, then that works as a brown. And then I bag up a bunch of leaves in the fall of the year in these black bags, so that way I can have plenty of browns to put in my compost. So today what we're going to do is we're going to build us a winter composting pile. We're going to talk a little bit about how to get compost to work all winter long, or at least most of the winter, depending on how far north you live. I have a black tarp over here that we're going to put over top of it, so that way we can control our moisture. Here in Tennessee, we have a lot of moisture in the winter time, so I don't want the pile to get too wet. We want to keep it around that 60% moisture if we can. 40 to 60 is ideal. But in the wintertime, we want to put a little more greens in it than we would in the summertime. If you get too many greens in your compost pile, it's going to get slimy. Like in the summertime when you put a lot of green grass, if it gets wet, it just gets stinky and gets slimy. That's usually two problems. One, too many greens, or two, too much moisture. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as we build this pile. We're going to start off with our browns right on the ground, some leaves, and then I have cow manure in these buckets. I have pure chicken manure in these 5-gallon buckets, and I've got a 5-gallon bucket of coffee grounds. Now the manure acts as green. So the chicken manure, of course everybody knows chicken manure is extremely high in nitrogen, so it's hot. Same with your coffee grounds, it works as a green. And then I have two small compost piles over here that I started back in September. The one's a lot further along. You can see it's pretty brown, and you'll see in the video. We're going to bring both of those piles out from those pallets and put them right on top of this pile. And then we're going to cover it with a tarp to be able to control the moisture and humidity, and the black tarp will help pull a little bit of heat into it, but it'll also help keep the heat in. It's the middle of February right now. I plan on using this part of the garden this year in May when we plant the garden. So I have a few months for this compost to work, and it should have plenty of time. And once it gets done, the only thing I'm going to do is just spread the pile out right here, right on this part of the garden. So let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, we're going to start with the browns first. First thing we want to do is put some browns down. So I have a bag of leaves. We're going to put them down first. You can see they're wet. When I put them in the bag, most of them are wet. I try to gather them up when they're wet, but now this is too wet. Some of it's too wet, and you can hear this crumbling. This is too dry. You know, there's not enough moisture in there. So what we want to do is spread this out and try to mix up the leaves that are wet and the leaves that are dry. Now we've had a pretty good rain the last few days here. So our compost piles are going to be nice and wet. And that's what we're going to put on next. So that's a pretty good little base. Now, don't get too caught up in your ratios. I read online all the time, you know, you need to have X amount of browns and X amount of greens. Most of the time I try to do it 2 to 1, sometimes even 1 to 1. In the winter time I want more greens, more manure, so it'll get hot quicker, and it helps keep it hot. But don't get too caught up in the percentages. because it's going to compost as long as you have a good mixture of greens and browns. Once we turn this pile again, they're all going to get mixed up, even though we're kind of layering it here. I see people all the time, oh, you have to layer it, you have to layer your greens and browns, which is fine for the first build. But as soon as you turn it, they're all going to get mixed up anyhow, and that's what you want. You want them to all get mixed up. So try not to get too caught up in it. Just make sure you have enough browns to where your greens don't get all slimy if you get too much moisture. The next thing I want to do is move this compost pile that's just about ready. I'm going to move a lot of it right on top of these leaves. So this is good biology. I know that this compost has been working all winter and it's just about done. So I'm going to use it to put in the middle of the pile here. And this is going to help jumpstart our pile. There's all kinds of bugs in here, worms, everything in here. I checked this with my compost thermometer the other day, and it was right around 100 degrees, and the temperature was 38 degrees outside. So I know this has been working all winter long. But it's going to take me a little while to move a lot of this over. So I'm just going to do this on time lapse. Okay, that's got us a pretty good compost pile here. I'll monitor this. We'll cover it up with a tarp, the black tarp, and weight it down. And then I'll just keep an eye on it. I'll stick my compost thermometer in there a couple times over the next few weeks. Once it starts to heat up pretty good and gets around that 120, 130 range, I'll let it stay there for a few days and then I'll turn it. So what I'll do is I'll bring my pitchfork back out here, and this whole pile I'll move right over to the other side. And by May, when it's time to plant our garden, this is going to be a nice pile of compost. Now, I don't know if you could tell in the video, but I put leaves down, of course, and then put some of the compost that's already started or almost finished actually in the bottom and in the middle, because that's giving good bacteria and good fungi. There was a lot of fungi in that compost. It's putting it right in the center of the pile, and then I put chicken manure on top of that, some horse manure, and then some more browns, then some more manure, some more compost, some more browns, and you just keep going like that. Just try to get it at roughly 1-to-1 ratio, your greens and browns, or 2-to-1, 2 browns to 1 green. And then I top it off with this cow manure. This is out of the barn. This cow manure, it's partially composted, but it's still not completely composted, so I'll let a good rain get on here. I'll uncover it. When I know we're going to get a rain, I'll let it soak this outer layer here, and then I'll put the tarp right back on it after it gets it good and wet, and I'll just keep an eye on it. So for now, I've got plenty of compost left in those 2 bins. I have plenty of material. This material I've been gathering for about 2 weeks now, cleaning out the barn, getting horse manure, getting pig manure, getting cow manure, chicken manure, and then cleaning out the stalls with the hay in it. And it has urine and manure. It has the biology that you want to get your compost pile going well. If you don't have any manures, you can buy a compost starter. Also, both of these compost piles last year, I put my biochar in them. So that way that biochar is going to be inoculated this spring by the time I put this on my garden. So it's not going to be absorbing a whole lot of nitrogen. There's already going to be all kinds of bacteria and fungi living in that biochar, so it'll really help our plants in the garden this spring. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to build us another pile right over here where this hay is. I want to show you this real quick. This hay's been sitting out here a couple weeks. This came out of our barn stall, and I went to move it a minute ago, and there's all kinds of worms in here. And you have different earthworms. Everybody calls an earthworm, but there's different ones. The red wigglers usually stay close to the top. And then you have those that are in the 6-inch to 1 foot range down into the soil. But there was just all kinds of worms in here when I peeled this back. Of course, a lot of them have took off now since I went and grabbed the camera. But there's another one. But you can see these are the worms that help your compost. The red wigglers, they stay in the surface of the soil. And these are the ones that'll help your compost. They're going to eat the leaves, they're going to eat the compost, and then deposit their droppings inside your compost pile, so you'll have worm castings. Now I've read articles where some articles say worms are good and some say they're bad. I don't see how anything, the regular red wigglers, I don't see how they could be bad. They're going to loosen your soil in your garden, and they're going to deposit their droppings in there. Now they do eat your nutrients, and I think that's where the people that say they're bad, where they're coming from, that they eat the nutrients in the soil. But I can't help but think, you know, if they're depositing their droppings right back in, they're converting it into worm castings, those nutrients. So as long as you give them plenty to eat, they're not going to be eating your plant nutrients. They're going to be depositing their droppings in there, and worm castings, as we all know, are just great for a garden. I just wanted to show you that real quick. In just 2 weeks' time, how many worms were already just under this little pile. All right, this is another pile that's been sitting here a couple weeks. I just flipped it over, and you can see all the earthworms in there. They're taking off everywhere. But just sitting out here on the ground for about 2 weeks, the earthworms have already found it and already starting to do their job. Start another pile here, right next to the other one. This pile was where I cleaned out a stall. So it has hay and manure and urine in it. And I have a whole lot of horse manure here and some coffee grounds. So what I'm going to do is put some leaves down first, about a half a bag of leaves. Then we're going to start on the compost that's just about finished over here. Put it on here, get some compost that's been working pretty much most of the winter. It's not even close to finishing yet, but it still works some. We're going to put it on, then leaves, hay, and manure. We're just going to keep rotating that. We're going to build this pile just like we did that one. Well, this pile's done. I probably have enough materials to make at least one more pile like this, so I think I'm going to drop back here about where the camera is and make another pile. But I just wanted to review real quick on your winter composting. You know, you want to make your piles big enough that the center doesn't freeze. So that's part of the reason we put a tarp over this, not just to control moisture, but by using a black tarp, we're trying to keep the center from freezing because we want those microbes to live. We don't want them to get a hard freeze. So by piling it up about the size that we have right here, that gives enough insulation between the leaves, the brown materials, and the green materials to protect all the microbes in the soil, so that way they don't freeze. Like I said, it's mid-February now, so we're going to have a few more cold nights, but hopefully we won't have anything down around 0. So these should be fine. So the only other thing I'm going to do is put a black tarp over top of these. I'm done for today. I may build one more, like I said, where the camera is tomorrow if I get time. I've got enough material left in my compost bins here, and I got another couple bags of leaves and a couple more bags of manure, or buckets of manure. But if you have any questions or comments on winter composting, please leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching.